Hey guys, my name is Corme, and today I want to talk to you guys about healing checks inside of Shadowlands Mythic Plus. So what we're looking at is encounters that require a lot of throughput. So you can think of this in BFA as things like Galvaz and Temple, Kragmaw and Underrat, or even trash mobs like Zool that required you to spam the tank, or like you think of like the Honor Guards in the Dead Side of Atal that just like spit out all the green stuff and required you to heal a lot, things like that. So we're going to go dungeon by dungeon. I'm going to point out where I think those little healing checks are going to be in each dungeon, and I want to start with the Ardent Wheel dungeons. So first we're going to look at is the other side. So a lot of people have been drawing conclusions, or like comparisons I should say, that this dungeon is a lot like King's Rest. It is in the fact that like it feels a lot like just a lot of bosses. It's hard to skip the trash, it feels super linear, and the fights are all pretty decently hard. The two fights I want us to look at today are the Monostorms, which is in like the Mechagon Ring, and then Dealer Zyexxa, which is in the Arden Wheeled Ring, and then this trash mob right here, which is like the Raging Behemoth. And there's two of them that kind of just pat around the center ring of the dungeon. First one is the Monostorms. So the Monostorms has two phases. The first is with the guy down, and the second is with the girl down. The first one with the guy down is pretty reminiscent of Galv. He spawns these crystals, and you have to take turns soaking them. They don't go away like the Galv pillars do. As soon as one is down, it stays forever, and by the end of it, you have 4 of them that you're trying to juggle. The longer you stand in a crystal, you take more damage from the crystal. However, you also get a stacking damage done buff. This isn't really like a DPS race though, so your DPS don't have to be like that greedy in this phase. It's mostly just about deciding how you're going to manage the stacks. There's also other mechanics going on at the same time that you have to manage, so it gets a little crazy trying to make sure that people are always able to soak a beam. Also this week, they did buff it by 33%, which is why I'm including it. I didn't think it was a crazy hard to heal before, but I think on a high key now with this 33% buff, because that is a lot, it is going to be pretty hard to handle and deal with moving around that much. Alright, so stage 2 is when the guy goes back and then the girl comes down. She does this debuff on your tank called Buzzsaw, which leaves a bleed. It's a lot of tank damage. And at the same time, someone is always getting Shadow Fury. It's just like the Warlock ability. It's an AoE stun. You want to aim Shadow Fury onto the boss and make sure nobody else is inside of it. That person takes a lot of damage. A lot of the time they're going to have to pop a defensive to live. This is really annoying though when it goes on the healer, because you're stunned, you're taking a lot of damage, and you can't just sit there and spam your tank. That was the first boss I want to talk to you guys about. The second one is Dealer Zyexxa. So she puts out this debuff that kind of you have to manage and make sure that it's jumping around. If you don't manage it correctly, then you get a lot of these arcane vulnerability stacks, and the amount of damage your group ends up taking from jumping this debuff around gets really unmanageable. So again, this can't be managed correctly, but if it's not managed correctly, or even if it's just managed marginally well, this boss does a lot of damage. Alright, and then I want to talk to you guys about the Enraged Spirit. So the Enraged Spirit does a channel called Rage, which is just an AoE to everyone in the group, and it does a lot of damage. The only way to stop this is to displace the mob. This is really similar to in the Gauntlet inside of King's Rest, where the guy would do the AoE lightning and you had to knock him back to stop it after he started doing his channel. The nice thing about this was though, if you didn't have a knockback in your group, you could just outrange it. So you weren't required to bring a knockback in order to do this mob. The problem with this mob is that it doesn't have a range. It just hits absolutely everyone, so you need to have a knockback. If there's any like kind of mechanic that I think like a healer has some kind of advantage to, I'm going to highlight them in green, and then if some other healer can't do it, I'm going to put them in red. So here I have the healers with knockbacks in green, and the 2 healers that don't have knockbacks in red for this mechanic. Alright, next dungeon I want to talk to you guys about is Mists of Tirna's Scythe. So this is just a 3-boss dungeon, and there's 2 things I want us to look at here. The first is the maze. You have to go through a maze to get, it's a maze and a puzzle combined in order to get from the first boss to the second boss. And the last thing is the last boss, Tridova, which is famously hard to handle and learn. Alright, so talking about the maze. So the maze, you have to do this puzzle where you have to go around to each of these pillars in order to be able to visualize the symbols. Once you're standing next to them, you can't see the symbol anymore. So it's usually going to be the healer's job to go around and do this, because while this is going on, there's also mobs in every single room, and so your tank and your DPS are just fighting this while you go around and you solve the puzzle, and then you tell your group which door to go through. If you don't know how to do this, I do have a video out on it on how to solve the puzzle. However, I think some healers are going to have an advantage in this part of the dungeon because they don't need to be in melee. This is the first room. It's really small. All the pillars are like close together, but a lot of the rooms it's really big and you have to run around a lot, and it's like weirdly shaped, and you actually like by the time you finish the puzzle, all the mobs are dead, and so you spend the majority of the time just doing the puzzle. You don't ever get to get in melee. So this is a severe disadvantage for melee healers, so paladins and mistweavers, because you can't be crusader striking to get holy power, or you can't be like RS Kane and stuff like that to extend your hots if you're playing Rising Mist, things like that. So I have the 2 melee healers in red and all of the range healers in green, because the range healers actually don't lose that much by having to go around and do this puzzle. Next I want to talk to you guys about Tredova. So Tredova has a lot of really annoying mechanics that all overlap. The first one is Mind Link. It basically just forces your whole group to spread out because it makes them have to spread out from each other. It's a lot of movement with a good amount of damage going on everyone at the same time. And then he also does Consumption, which is just an AoE to everyone in the group this whole time he's doing it. It's a lot of swirlies on the ground. He also does this other ability that makes you dodge swirlies. It's a ton of movement, which is why I've highlighted Druid here. The other thing is that because right now it's mostly like a free-for-all, having extra range is actually really valuable on this boss. So if you're a Druid who's playing Moonkin Affinity, it really helps out because everyone in the group ends up being spread out because of Mind Link and this other swirly mechanic that's going on. I'm not talking about it because it doesn't do damage, but having the range really helps out. The other thing that goes on is Parasitic Domination. This is an MC. So you can stop the MC if you immunity, or if you bop the person, which is why I've highlighted Paladin, or if you have Tremor Totem, which is why I've highlighted Shaman. Being able to avoid that MC and having to break that person out is also really valuable in this fight. Okay, next dungeon I want to talk to you guys about is Halls of Atonement. So there are 2 things I want to talk about here. The first one is these Shards of Halkias. There's 3 of them. You have to kill all 3 of them in order to activate the first boss. And then the second boss is also pretty difficult to deal with. Okay, so these Shards of Halkias, again, you have to kill all 3. So they'll do this channel AoE thrash. It's kind of like the Kragma Tantrum, where it just does damage to everyone. You can, however, outrange it if you can go, again, past 40 yards, which is why, again, I've highlighted Druid, because they can take Moonkin Affinity a lot this expansion and benefit from it. If you only have to heal 4 people through it instead of 5 people, it makes it a lot easier to deal with. Another annoying thing that happens is every single time the Shard of Halkias casts Thrash, every shard has a Depraved Collector with it, and it always lines up where it does a Siphon Life cast at the same time as the Thrash, and it's not interruptible. This is just like a magic debuff that you can dispel. But it's really annoying that it always goes out with the Thrash because you have to stop healing in order to spare the global to dispel Siphon Life. And it's really important that you immediately dispel it. Again, it's just a magic debuff, so any healer can deal with that. It's just annoying, and I'm pointing it out. Okay, so the second boss is Echelon. So Echelon calls out these ads. They're like little imps. And then once you kill them, they turn to stone. So when they turn to stone, they do something called Volatile Transformation, and it just does AoE damage to everyone. Before they turn to stone, they do Villainous Bolt. So the Villainous Bolt is just like a random cast on anyone in your group, and if there's 6 of them and they all line up and they all like target the same person and you're not interrupted, you can easily just one bang someone if you're not being careful about that. So that's pretty hard to heal through. And then once they turn to stone, they won't despawn. They'll come back to life after like 30 seconds unless you put a Stone Shattering Leap on them. And at the same time, so the Stone Shattering Leap is just like a circle. So someone gets targeted with it, they put the circle on it, and then once like his like channels like finishes and he's about to leap, you move out of the circle so you don't take damage from it. At the same time that's happening though, the Curse of Stone comes out. It's a curse. You have to decurse it. So you want to be able to decurse whoever gets targeted by the Stone Shattering Leap, which is why having a decurse on this fight is so important. You only have to have 1, so you can get away with just having like a mage or a boomkin. It doesn't have to be the healer with a curse spell, but having an extra curse spell is really nice because there's also just a decent amount of damage going out and you want to be able to keep healing during this phase. So I've highlighted these 2 healers that do have curse spells. Next one I want to talk about is Sanguine Depths. This is by far my least favorite dungeon. It's just, it's really anti-melee is basically the reason why. But there's 3 things I want us to look at in here. The first one is Executor Tarvold. The second are these Gargons, which are in the gauntlet. There's a gauntlet after the the 3rd boss to the 4th boss. And then of course I want to talk to you guys about the 4th boss. So Executor Tarvold does this targeted channel on someone called Castigate, and it just does a bunch of damage to them. It basically does like the same amount of damage. I want to say more than like a Rixodot would do. It does a little bit more than that. And then it also will do AoE damage to anyone who's standing within 8 yards of them, so you have to make sure everybody's spreading from them. He also summons an ad. Every single time he summons an ad, the ad spawns, and the ad will just keep doing AoE damage to everyone in the group. So I think there might be a strat that develops in higher keys. I'm not you have to take this with a grain of salt, me highlighting these healers, because this is only if this strat becomes prevalent that I think these healers have an advantage here. You can not, like, the ad just like decays health on its own, and you can root the ad in a little side room. There's little side rooms like the cages inside of Tol Dagor, and if you root them inside the room and you just go outside, the ad will just kill itself and you won't take any damage from it. And you can completely negate the mechanic. It takes a good amount of coordination, I think, though. I think it is really easy with the druid because you can just keep rerouting it even if it gets broken by damage. But you can also do it with like Earth Grab Totem, or you can ring and paralysis it. You can't do things like, you can't like cage it, you can't banish it. You can stun it, but most hard CCs don't work. The only one we found that worked, like Cyclone doesn't work on it, the only one that worked was paralysis. And root, of course. Alright, so next I want to talk to you about the Gargans. So these Gargans in the gauntlet, they just keep spawning nonstop. They spawn 2 at a time, and as soon as you kill 2, they just keep spawning. They're not worth any count, and the only way to get them to stop spawning is to complete the gauntlet. They keep you in combat. You won't get to drink the whole gauntlet unless you get really lucky or unless you have Shadow Melt. And once you're in melee, they just do this AoE 360, no way to dodge, it's not a frontal thing called Tear. And this is just like the M0 damage on like a 12 if you're standing in melee. And there's always 2 of them, and they're always like synced up so they go at the same time. They'll just like, they'll do their Tear and you're immediately below 40% HP on like a 12. On like a 16, you're like below like 10% health right now on beta. It's absolutely insane. You just don't want to be melee in this dungeon because of this, because there's also a bunch of other just incidental damage that's going out. Like General Call is there, like jumping on people and stuff like that. There's so much incidental damage going out. It's so much to heal through, especially when you can't drink the whole thing. And for that reason, I put our 2 melee healers in red, because adding another melee to heal, meaning yourself, is absolutely miserable in this dungeon, because it's just so much damage. You almost just don't want to stand in melee because it's less things you have to heal that are going on. But yeah, they buffed these mobs. People were started complaining about them a lot, and they just went ahead and buffed them for, I have no idea what's going through their head, but it's absolutely awful. Okay, the last boss I want to talk to you, or the last boss in the dungeon, is General Call. Okay, so General Call does something called a Wicked Rush. She puts arrows on 2 people, and those 2 people kind of spread out, and then once she starts like dashing toward them to do the rush, you can just walk out of it, or use like Transcend or Horsey or something to get out of it so you don't take the dot. This gets a little complicated though when Piercing Blur is going off. So like on the whole platform there'll be 3 lines to go like all the way across the platform, and they'll go off in a certain order, and you have to dodge these lines. And so it gets really hard to dodge the Wicked Rush and not cleave your friends while you're dodging the lines when these 2 things go off at the same time, because there will be overlaps that happens, and it's almost, I'm sure there's a way to avoid the damage, but right now it's so chaotic trying to do it. So if you get bad overlaps like that, people are bad at dodging, this fight gets insanely hard to heal, and there's a lot of movement going on as well. I'm pretty sure that like paladins can like bop it off, so even though like they're kind of lacking in like the movement department, they do have some kind of way to help them through this boss fight. Alright, so the next dungeon I want to talk to you about is Spires of Ascension. So these are the Bastion dungeons. Alright, so Spires of Ascension is basically like all these platforms you have to jump between. So that's why these maps look so disconnected. And the 2 things I want to talk to you guys about are the second boss and these 3 angels that are standing in front of the last boss. Okay, so the second boss, this is a lot like the Axe Lady in the Triad, the Council Triad inside of King's Rest. So he puts down these like void portals, whatever. They spawn these balls go out. If you get hit by these balls, you get knocked like way up in the air, and you take a lot of damage. I think like on a 12, it was like knocking me below 20% HP, so it's pretty close. It's like on a high key, it's probably gonna one-shot you or get really close to one-shotting you. And also, as soon as you get knocked up, if there's another one below you, there's no way for you to dodge it. It really sucks. At the same time, while you're trying to dodge all this, he's doing Dark Stride. So Dark Stride is just like the Axe debuff from that lady as well. The difference here is that there's some ways to cheese getting the Axe debuff by like popping like Riposte or Turtle before, things like that. But the thing with Dark Stride is that it only targets the range players. So if you only have like a mage and you're like a Holy Paladin or something, it's always just going to keep targeting your mage. and then it never ends. It just like as soon as it starts, like she's just gonna keep refreshing it and keep jumping on someone. There's always something to heal through. So they did nerf this dot. I don't think it's like not a crazy amount to heal through, but when you take into account how much dodging you have to do on this fight, I think it is gonna take a good healer on a high key to be able to like manage dodging all this and planning out their casts, especially since we have such high cast times right now because we have such low haste in order to heal the person through this debuff. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about are the 3 angels. So each of these 3 angels has like a special like aura associated with them. The first one is Aura of Intimidation, which is just like a stacking damage buff that you take the whole time you're fighting her. The second one is Oppression, which is another stacking debuff that just increases the damage you take. And the third one is that they throw these charged spears. These charged spears are really annoying because when they get thrown, it doesn't give you any indication to how... Okay, well, like, each time they're... Once they're on the ground, they pulse. So they'll pulse in 4 directions. And these line, and they'll like pulse out in lines. They move really fast. You can like see them over here. Pulls out in 4 directions, and they do a lot of damage. You want to dodge them. The only way to know though what direction they're gonna go is to watch which angle the angel threw it from. So there's not like a really clear visual on the spears, and you have to do a good job of keeping track where the angel was when she threw each one, and it gets really crazy. Anyways, so as soon as you kill one angel, say you kill this one, and you go to fight the next one, this next angel has the powers of this angel and himself. So by the time you get to that third angel, that third angel has all of the powers. So it gets really crazy to try and heal through it, just like, and there's also like strategy involved in deciding which of these angels you want to fight first. I've seen it pulled all 3 ways. I've heard arguments for different ways and stuff like that, but I think it's really cool. Anyways, it can be a lot of healing, especially when you put together the damage taken, increased debuff, and just the stacking dot that you're taking at the same time. If you get hit by the charged spear while either of the other 2 are active, you're basically just, you're dead. Yeah, I think this is really cool. Next dungeon is Necrotic Wake. So I only want to talk to you guys about one dungeon, one boss in this dungeon. This dungeon has been, it's not a very fun dungeon, and there's always been some kind of like exploit to get through it. Before it was that you could skip, or not skip the second boss, but the second boss would basically, like, there was an angel that was up here and you could get her to kill the boss. And so I've never really done the boss fight, and then this week I was like, oh, I'm actually gonna do the boss fight, but now there's some other bug where there's like a hammer here that people just like spam and it just like insta kills everyone. So I'm only gonna talk to you guys about this third boss because everything else is always just a mess. Alright, so we're gonna look at Surgeon Stitchflesh. So this boss isn't overly complicated from a healer's perspective. He just puts out this debuff, and he puts it out a lot, and he puts it out on multiple people, and it just trucks. You just have to sit there and heal through it. There's not an insane amount of movement. There's some mechanics you're gonna have to do, like if you get the hook, you have to hook the boss, and if you get fixated, you have to run, and that can really suck. But other than that, it's just a lot of healing. Yeah. So just look out for that one. So next dungeon, this is in Maldraxxus. It's going to be Theater of Pain. So Theater of Pain is a 5-boss dungeon. All of the bosses are like decently hard, like none of them are just like tank and spank, but there is one that's particularly difficult. A lot of people have been calling this like the Galvaz of Shadowlands. So this boss has a lot of abilities he does that you have to deal with as a healer. The first one is Phantasmal Parasite. It's a magic debuff that he puts out on 2 people. You can think of it really similar to like Brixa, where she just puts out 2 magic debuffs at a time. You just spell one and you heal through the other. Except this isn't the same as Rixa, where you can kind of like bait it and like bait your immunities for it, because she just does that on 2 random people. That could be the tank, that could be yourself, or it could just be the DPS. So usually you just dispel one and heal through the other. Of course, if you do have Massive Spell or Revival, then you can get rid of both at the same time, which is why I've highlighted those healers over here. A word of caution though to Mistweavers, if you can dispel it with Diffuse Magic, however, pay attention to the second line where it says it'll inflict damage to everyone within 3 yards every 1 second for 10 seconds. So if you Diffuse Magic it on the boss, instead of just having to heal the one person who had it, you now have to heal your tank and whatever melee are there, including yourself because you're in melee, so just don't diffuse because you're gonna make way more healing for yourself. Okay, so the second thing we have to worry about is the Chill of Beyond. This isn't like a crazy amount of just like AoE damage, it's just like in conjunction with everything else. It just adds a little bit of extra damage for us to heal throughout the entirety of this boss. Down here, this is basically just like a DPS only mechanic, so you won't ever have to do this as a healer. Kolthurok will choose 2 people to draw their soul, and then they'll become soulless. While they're soulless, they're taking damage. The way they break this is to run into these grasping hands, so it's like these little circles that are on the ground on the platform. Once they do that, they can break it. So while they're soulless, they're taking damage. When they run into the grasping hands, they take this big burst of damage. And then while they're in the hands, if they stay there, they're taking even more damage. So all of these things together just create a bunch of damage that you have to heal through. Sometimes it's unhealable. They did nerf this again this week. Remember, like last week, I saw healers doing like usually at least 6k up to 8k HPS in order to get through this fight. Just for like some like reference on those numbers, I would like on live I would say those numbers are pretty similar to like 150k HPS, and that was like doing this boss like last week on like a tyrannical like 11 or 12. A lot of the time we just couldn't kill this boss and we just had to leave the dungeon on tyrannical because it was so awful. But yeah, great boss. Next thing we're gonna talk about is Plaguefall. So this dungeon has had a lot of rework. A lot of the trash and stuff like that is still pretty nasty, but I wouldn't call it like any one mob just like a heal check or anything. I would just say like all in all there's a lot of dispels in this dungeon too, so it's really nice if you have like a disease dispel or even like a poison dispel for the 3rd boss. But the one that encounter I do want to talk to you guys about is the last boss, which is Margrave Stratama. So she does something called Infectious Rain. So she puts a debuff, like a disease, on the entire party. And then while she's channeling it, it's stacking up, and then it gets to max stacks at the end of her channel, and it still keeps ticking on you for like 6 more seconds. The nice thing about this is that it can be dispelled if you have a disease dispel, which is why I've highlighted our disease dispelling healers over here. So the thing about this is that right now it's not that crazy because this boss has like phases. Like you like pull her, you DPS her for 30 seconds, she goes like underground, you do this like intermission dance, and then you do like the same thing. She comes up, DPS her for like 30%, she goes underground, you do this intermission dance. And in those first 2, if you push her fast enough, you actually won't even get this mechanic in the first phase. But if you're slow, she'll just keep on casting it. And the same thing with the 2nd phase. And then the 3rd phase, as soon as she comes up, she basically starts casting it, and she just never stops until the end. So the last phase is kind of like a burn because you're taking a bunch of damage and it's hard to heal through, and you're having to do the dance at the same time. It's a lot of movement. The point is though, is that the higher you go, the more of these you're gonna get, because it's gonna take you even longer to push her. And not only will you be doing more damage, you'll be getting more instances of the damage, kind of similar to like Kragma, where you get more tantrums if you didn't push his health fast enough. Yeah, so right now it doesn't feel that crazy hard, but I guarantee as keys get higher and you start getting more of these, this boss is gonna truck. But yeah, that was the end of my video. I hope you guys found this helpful, and good luck beating those healing checks.